Gardening is universal. No matter where we live, what we grow, or how we garden, we share the same instinct to nurture something and watch it flourish. With more than 3 decades in the garden industry, Paul Zimmerman explores the passion that connects gardeners around the world with those who also live in it. Drawing on years of travel, conversations with international growers and hobby gardeners, and countless visits leading garden tours everywhere from France to England to New Zealand, Paul looks beyond the how-to and dives into the deeper questions. Why do we garden? What's changing in the gardening world? And what does it reveal about who we are? Please welcome your host, Paul Zimmerman.
Welcome to my inaugural podcast of A World of Gardening with Paul Zimmerman, who is myself, of course. And I want to talk a little bit about why I'm doing this. I've been blessed to travel all over the world and look at gardens and meet fellow gardeners, professional gardeners, amateur gardeners, hobby gardeners, you name it, whatever it may be. And I've learned sort of this global village that we have in the gardening world. And that's really what I want to bring to this and bring you some of what I've learned as I've traveled throughout the world, literally meeting, gardeners and seeing gardens all over the place. So we're going to meet people, interview people, talk a little bit. If you've got ideas for guests, I would love to hear about it. I'm going to talk about roses, of course. That's inevitable since it's my passion. But this is going to be all kinds of gardening as well, perennials, shrubs. We'll cover whatever the world of gardening brings to us in this podcast. That's really what I want to do. So that's what this is about. That's why I've started it, because a podcast is kind of cool. You can listen to it while you're gardening or doing whatever you do. I love doing videos, as you know, and I've done those over the years. But I think a podcast just kind of frees me up to do some things a little bit differently. So I'd like to start each episode with some basic care tips. That's what we'll do before I introduce my guests and what this episode is all about, which is called Why We Garden, with three very special friends of mine that we're going to be bringing into this podcast in just a moment. Care tips. I live in the upstate of South Carolina, foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, beautiful area. I love it here very, very much. It is spring in my area as we speak right now. It's the end of March. Spring seems a little earlier this year, actually. Rosa spinosissima altaica popped a bloom out the other day, which was very early. Normally my peak bloom used to be around Mother's Day, but all of a sudden it seems to be moving up to the end of April, and I think this year it might even be sooner. My fingers crossed is I don't get a sudden freeze, which we can get. We call it the Easter freeze around here. I don't see one on the horizon, but I am popping green. I prune when the forsythia bloom. That's when I prune my roses. I'm a little behind this year, but I'm catching up to some degree. My perennials themselves, I'm still leaving a little bit. I want to leave them for another week or two. I've got a lot of rough foliage, particularly in my bronze fennel and my echinacea. I've got those long hollow tubes that beneficials tend to overwinter in, and I just want to make sure that those beneficials can get out and become my good guys in the garden for the rest of the year. Spring and year area, it's either sprung, is springing, is about to spring. I hope I got those right. And a couple of things you want to think about, pruning, cutting back, and the timing that I just talked about is very, very important. Soil test. That's something to always think about every single year. If you haven't done one for a couple of years, I want you to do one. They're inexpensive. Your local agricultural extension office. I use Clemson University, so a local university with a good Hort program will probably be able to help you. It's a roadmap for the rest of the year. Think of it like going to the doctor and saying, okay, here's your annual physical checkup. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to cut down on sodium. I want you to do this or do that. Same with a soil test. Here's your soil test. Your pH is a little bit low, so I want you to add some lime. That's going to be me. My pH is always low here in the upstate of South Carolina. It's your roadmap for the nutritional aspects of what you should be adding to your soil, feeding your soil to feed your plants, because that's the key. You feed your soil to feed your plants. Mulch. That's the next thing you want to do. Once you've done your soil test, you've added what you feel you need to add to your soil, put your mulch down. 1 or 2 is good. That's about what I use. I don't like to pile it on too heavy. I use double ground hardwood, which is from native trees in my area. Pine needles work. Compost, whatever you've got that's mulch is going to work. It seals the soil a little bit. Well, that's the wrong word. It doesn't seal the soil. That's the wrong word. It protects it from sudden temperature ranges, keeps in moisture. That's the things that mulch basically does. It also is organic material that will break down over a year. You've seen videos and things where I talk about a living soil profile. That's the whole thing like that. Late freezes. That's the last thing I want to talk about here before I introduce my guest. You may get one. I hope you don't. I get them every 4 or 5 years. I see damage to the plants when it freezes. The plants seem to die back some, and then all of a sudden I don't see new growth. So a couple things I want you to do. First thing I'm going to talk about is patience. Be very, very patient. Just because you see new growth after an initial freeze doesn't mean the plant is dead. It could be it's just in shock. So cut off any obvious dead growth. That's the thing you want to do. There's no harm in ever doing that. And then give it several months before you actually start to think about removing that plant. So for me, I talked about the April Easter freeze that I potentially can get earlier. When you get that freeze, I wait. June, July. Yeah, that long, June or July. I let them go through spring, let them kind of recover a little bit. There's hopefully repair work going in the root system. Roots first, top second. Remember that old gardening idiom. And that's the thing I want to do. So come June and July, if I do not see new growth, then I will probably go ahead and think about removing that plant. It's gone. It's dead at that point in time. If I do see new growth, great. I'll continue to cut off anything that's obviously dead, nurse the plant along a little bit. No real intense fertilizers. Some liquid seaweed is certainly a good thing. Liquid seaweed fish is certainly a good thing, but let the plant recover at nature's rhythms, which is always the best way to let any garden recover. So those are my care tips for spring. That's kind of what I'm doing. So we'll continue to offer those in the beginning of every single future podcast. But we are now on to bringing my guests on, and I am so excited about this. The title of this episode is Why We Garden, and that's the first one that I wanted to do. I was talking with my friend Teresa Byington, if you know from Rose Chat podcast, and she's actually one of my first guests on this episode. And that's what we thought would be a fun first episode, Why We Garden, but from an international perspective. So I'm really pleased to have, as I mentioned, Teresa Byington, co-host of the Rose Chat podcast and creator of the Garden Diaries, which is a blog about her garden, which is stunningly beautiful. You need to go check out the Garden Diaries and see that. The other guest is a dear friend of mine from the Netherlands, Geertje van der Groot. I hope I pronounced that correctly. She is a former partner in Bierkreek Nursery, which is one of the 2 rose nurseries in Europe certified by the European Union to be organic. That is not an easy certification to get. She's a lifelong gardener, lives on a beautiful farm in the Netherlands and Holland, and she will bring a wonderful perspective from that aspect as well. Last but not least, certainly, what would one of my podcasts or anything I do be without Michael Marriott involved? Michael and I have known each other for, well, probably longer than both of us probably want to admit because it reveals our age. We are like-minded. We have led garden tours together. We continue to lead garden tours together. You can find information on my website for those, paulzimmermanroses.com. Michael and his partner, Rosie, lead Todd Tours. 2 Old Duffers. That's the name of the tour, which I love. TOD, 2 Old Duffers. You can check those out on his website as well. So Michael is obviously going to join me. So would you please welcome Teresa, Geertje, and Michael. Geertje, Michael, and Teresa, very welcome to have you here, and thank you so much for what is basically my inaugural first podcast. Thank you, Teresa. Michael, say hello. Why don't you start us off and just say hey to everybody?
Hello. Lovely to, very good of you to invite me. Very exciting, and especially as the inaugural one. Yeah, it's a great idea. It should work very well. Very interesting.
Teresa, over to you.
Oh, it's so exciting. Thanks for inviting me. It's so good to be with all of you. And I know this is going to be a very successful endeavor. So way to go, Paul.
Thank you. Geertje?
And here's a hi from the Netherlands. And well, excuse my English if I don't know every word, but Paul will help me. And well, I'm excited to see what's happening tonight.
Yeah. So this, and the reason I wanted to have you all on, besides the fact, we've all known each other for a long, long time, is that, like Geertje mentioned, she's in the Netherlands, which of course has its own climate and its own way of outlook of doing things in her area of the world of gardening. Teresa, you're in Indiana, the upper Midwest of the United States. Again, you're a different, much colder climate than any of us are going to be in. Michael is from the United Kingdom with extensive gardening in the United Kingdom, but Michael also has traveled the world in his career, and so it brings that perspective as well. So I think what I'd like to begin is a way to sort of start this, you know, what began the gardening journey for all of you? I mean, I sort of started, I had a lawn care business in Miami, Florida when I was growing up, and certainly in Florida, that's 365 days a year. And I cut the grass and I got paid and things along those lines. And then, and didn't have a space for a while. And then all of a sudden, I sort of kind of got into it a little bit, but we'll kind of dive into that question right now. But what got you into gardening basically to begin with? So, Teresa, let's let you sort of begin that thread of conversation.
Well, it was easy for me because I came from a gardening family. We grew everything that we ate. We had large vegetable gardens, we had fruit trees, no flowers to speak of, but it was about food production. And my mom canned and froze and pickled just about everything. So, as you can imagine, I had plenty of garden time. But my dad always said of me, I was the only kid he knew that really liked to work in the garden. And that hasn't changed, but what has changed, now it's more flowers and less vegetables.
Yes, you came from a gardening family, and that's what sort of began the story. But I think it's interesting that you said, well, other children would look at that as a chore. Oh, I have to go outside. I have
Yeah.
to go do this. For you, there was a pleasure to it.
Yes, there was. There was even picking the beans, of which I loved to do, and no one else did.
Geertje, what sort of got you? What tickled your gardening bone to begin with?
Well, I think I have my father's genes. He had a small garden, but he loved it very much, and he did it until he died. And then I came here on the farm in 1989, and there was a very big garden, a flower garden and a vegetable garden. And my mother-in-law, she taught me everything. I just came from university and I didn't have a job. So I was very much busy in the garden with her, and that's how I learned the job.
So also a family connection between
Yeah,
you and
yeah.
Teresa seem to have that in common, which is kind of cool. I like that
Yeah.
aspect. Michael, how about you?
Yes, it's my parents strongly influenced me. So I was actually born in France, and I remember the garden in France when I was sort of it's sort of between 0 and 7, and the bearded irises. My father had a fantastic collection of bearded irises and ancient espaliered pear trees as well. And then when we came back to England, I sort of took over the garden. My parents, for various reasons, didn't have much time to garden, so we had a wall garden, which was, I don't know, probably a couple of acres or something like that, and I did practically all of the gardening at that stage. I did agricultural bossy because I come from a farming background, did agricultural bossy at university, and then spent 5 years in the South Pacific, but then came back and after a year or two got to work with David Austin's, which of course is where all plants absolutely fascinate me, and the fungi and the mycetes as well. So yeah, it's just a fascinating world altogether.
Yeah, it is. The more you dive into the world, the more interesting it becomes. And it's interesting that I'm hearing from you, Teresa family, Geertje family, Michael family. My parents were actually not into gardening, which I'm feeling like the odd person out here at the moment, I would say. It's a Dutch tradition. I mean, my family in the Netherlands were very much into gardening, but of course we rarely saw them. This is in the days of, I'm going to show my age here before you got on a plane and hopped across the pond, as they say. It was steamship travel from New York back in the day. So I think it's interesting that and in a way that you all had that common family connection that really did it. And so, Michael, if you had to say, you had the garden in France that you were very much interested in, and you worked with that, then you got back to England, the garden. Was there an aha moment that it went to just, or was it like that from the beginning for you? Or there's an aha moment you went, oh my gosh, there's something to this more than just actually getting out here and physically working.
Oh gosh, I can't think of one. No, I just sort of because I suppose my parents spent a lot of time gardening and went out with them. It just seemed a sort of natural thing to do to go out and work with plants and sow seeds, and take cuttings and grow them on and see the flowers developing and things like that. So it's just a natural progression, I think.
Yeah, Michael, would you say, I mean, they always say with the British that it's in your genes, gardening, and I think there's some things. I see Teresa nodding your head. I'm going to let you comment on this because I know you've been there as well. I mean, Michael, do you just think it's just part of your DNA that just being British, that gardening is just part of your heritage and just in you?
Well, I think the British climate is very amenable to. I mean, you can garden practically all the year round, and so there's rarely any hard frosts, and it's rarely too hot and dry. Although it is changing the last few years, really. So gardening is relatively easy, but I guess in sort of like in Indiana or somewhere like that, where it's just so cold in winter and then so hot in summer that it's just not so enticing to go out into the garden and pull up weeds or sow things or whatever. Whereas yeah, you can do things all the year round in the UK more or less.
I'd like to dive into this a little bit, this gardening as a cultural aspect, part of our culture, because Geertje, the Netherlands is obviously a huge gardening, and people always think of tulips when they think of Holland or the Netherlands, but
Well,
they're
I no, that's yeah. Well, tulips are more in Holland. That's the west of the country. Zeeland is also west, but tulips are only there because the soil is more suitable there. Here we have more sea clay, and that's no good for tulips. But yes, everyone has a garden because the country is very flat, and we don't have these apartment buildings in this side of the country, and also in the east. So everyone has a house with a garden, and if you want it or not, you have a garden. And if you don't want it, then you put tiles in it, and it's all concrete. But yeah, normally people like flowers. Yes.
Yeah, I find that with my family. I mean, my aunt was a keen gardener. Both my aunts were keen gardeners, and my cousins are keen gardeners in the Netherlands. And it just, like you said, a house has a small garden or a larger garden, whatever. It just seems to be part of the DNA, just sort of built into the culture. Of course, it's like, well, yeah, I have a car, I have a bike, and I have a garden. Of course, I have a garden. Why wouldn't I have a garden?
And of course, when I came on the farm here, everybody expected that I was going to do that garden, and I did, and I loved it. And
Yeah.
I changed it a bit in years because and on my in my university time I did a lot with wildflowers, wild plants, and the ecological systems among that plants, and I wanted that in my garden too. So after my mother-in-law taught me how to garden, I started changing the garden into a more natural system.
Yeah, which you've done well. I've been in I mean, your garden is stunning. And so Teresa, I'm going to ask you something here. Again, saying with this theme of, being part of the culture of who we are as people, because you have a rather interesting perspective on this. You garden in Indiana, in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, but I know
Mm-hmm.
that you spent time in the United Kingdom in England, and you have family currently in England. So I would love to you to sort of like touch on that theme of, as someone who kind of goes back and forth a bit.
Well, one of the things that I absolutely love when I go to England is you just feel like you're a part of it because as a someone who takes gardening very seriously and absolutely loves it, it's just what they do. Everyone has a garden. So many people have greenhouses. They compost. They just kind of get it. You go to a garden center there. It's just everything that you can imagine, which is not what we find in Indiana. It's getting better. But when you go there, I mean, gardening is just a part of their lifestyle from the very young to the very old. And then you even have the system of renting garden lots that if you don't have some place where you can garden, that you actually rent something. So it is very much a part of their life in ways that it hasn't truly been here, but it is on the rise. I mean, people are really, really interested in gardening. I think it happened a lot with COVID. People were at home, but I feel the garden spirit when I'm in England for sure.
I would just say that Teresa was saying that sees everybody gardening in England, but in fact we can learn things from people who live in hot climates, like in the States and Australia and places like that where it's very hot, and so we in the UK tend to be very bad at mulching the soil. Whereas you go over to the States and it's just sort of par for the course that everybody mulches their soil really well, and it's just such an important part of gardening. And the soil and plants benefit from it so much. That's something that I'm trying to instill into people over here. They must put a good layer of mulch on. If they over here, if they put on half an inch of mulch, sort of a couple of centimeters or something like that of mulch, I think they're doing a good job. But you in the States, you put on a good 3 or 4 inches, to 10 centimeters or something like that. That's the way to do it, and everything benefits so much from that good layer of mulch. So important.
Yeah, and I think that is the begins the differences in the way that sometimes we do garden. And I've been told that by some people that United States is so vast and there's so much empty land that, and one thing I have noticed when I've traveled around the world, particularly in Europe and places like that, because land is more precious because there's not as much of it. Geertje, you probably do or do not know the saying that I've heard it since I was a child. God made the world and the Dutch made Holland.
Yeah, yeah, they say that, and maybe it's true.
Yeah, but I
So,
mean, but land is precious there. I mean, you're on a
true.
farm, but you
Yes.
have, I've been on your farm. You actually have, I can't remember how many hectares you've got, but that's a big piece of property for the Netherlands.
Yeah, 40, 50 hectares is for this area. It's normal, but for other sides of the countries, it's a lot. It's an awful lot, and well, the price says it all. We ask 100,000 euros for 1 hectare at the moment, so it's very, very expensive, and
Yeah. Well,
and
I think that it's also so precious too. I think, land is precious.
exactly, that's why they pay 100,000 euros for 1 hectare.
Well,
And
I think,
Gosh.
so
and
would
that's
you,
arable land. That's not gardens or land to build on. That's even much, much, much more expensive. But it's just land to put your potatoes on, and your sugar beets and everything.
Europe has always been in England, and Geertje, you certainly were a pioneer in for me personally, my one of my personal gurus to get me to teach me about organic gardening. Is there a correlation, do we think, between land being precious and then being stewards of the land in organic gardening? Michael, you want to take with that one?
Yes, the organic movement is growing in the UK, but I mean, there's still an awful lot of farmers. I mean, this time of year, especially, you drive around the countryside, you see all these fields being sprayed off with Roundup, with glyphosate, and it's so sad to see, and it's just such a horrible sight. But yeah, it is gradually growing. But I mean, I take off my hat to anybody who grows crops organically. It must be such hard work. I mean, it's something that I very much do myself, and I know I have a lot of failures. I have obviously I have success, but a lot of failures as well. So anybody who does it on a commercial basis and succeed, wow, good for them. But it is so important to the to everything. Interfering in nature is just such a bad thing to do. It always bites you in the tail in the end.
Yeah.
And it does make you appreciate the land so much more if you rather than just going out there and blazing everything and then causing even more problems.
Yeah, and Michael, I'm going to let you appreciate Geertje here for a minute. So Geertje was a partner in the Netherlands called in a nursery called Bierkreek or Bierkreek, which was
Yep.
I think one of the only two certified organic rose production commercial nurseries in the entire European Union.
That's true. There's another one in Germany, and we started this organic rose nursery in 1999. And we were, as you said, we were pioneers in that. There were no books. We just had to do it ourselves. But we had the advantage that my husband was a farmer, and our companion Hans, he was a forester. I studied environment, and Hans's partner, she was an ecologist. So the four of us together could make it happen, and of course we learned a lot, and we tripped a lot, but no, we managed, and we did that for 25 years. And Hans and Marianne are still doing it, but they don't have a real nursery anymore. They buy and sell. But for 25 years, we made our own roses organically. Yes.
Amazing, wonderful.
Yeah, that's where I learned a lot of it from. And Teresa, I mean, I think we're seeing that movement. You know, you and I have talked about this before on Rose Chat Radio, which of course you co-host with Chris Van Cleve, and the other things we talked about Europe being a little bit ahead of the United States in terms of organics. But I mean, it's coming to the US. Are you seeing a more consciousness about that?
Well, I think one of the things that I've seen is that when I was growing roses in the 80s, I couldn't imagine the kind of roses that we would have now. The release of the knockout rose just changed everything. Will actually made money with roses, and we saw that people really did want sustainable practices. So all of a sudden, I just feel like we saw a huge change. And now we have so many beautiful roses that don't require what the roses that we were trying to grow back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So one of the things that I've been a part of is just watching my master gardeners change. So they I was getting really into roses, and when I would talk to my master gardeners, they're kind of like, been there, done that. No, I'm not going to do that anymore. And so I thought, okay, but they're different now. So I did a program, and I called it Just Like the 80s Hairstyle, Just Like Hairstyles, Roses Have Changed Since the 80s. And I gave it to the master gardeners, several master gardeners. And we talked about the rose trials, and we talked about the new roses being released. And many of my master gardener friends now grow roses. But every year, I just simply can't wait to see what's going to be released, because they're getting better, they're more beautiful, healthy, and we're even seeing fragrance. So we're seeing a big, big change.
And I think it probably started with Cordes in Germany, didn't it? Because he decided he wouldn't spray his trial fields anymore. And of course, just about every single last rose lost all its leaves and died and just collapsed. And there was just this small handful of ones that survived. And from that, he's built up his breeding program. And his latest varieties are, from the point of view of health, and as you say, fragrance as well, and beautiful plants, beautiful flowers as well. They are really good. And of course, the other rose breeders around the world, Tantals and David Austin's, they are very good for health as well. So it's something. I don't who's the main breeder of healthy roses in the States these days, apart from Bill Radler.
Oh, I think we have several. We've got David Slezak. We've got Jim Spruill. We're still getting a lot of nice introductions from Mayon. Paul, jump in.
Oh, yes, Mayon's very good.
Yeah, there's a lot of amateur breeders. There's a lot of amateur breeders coming along too. That I'm doing some testing with my work with Jackson Perkins on some amateur breeders and no spray testing, and we're working with that as well. So it's a nice thing. So Geertje, you were probably seeing a lot of these roses that Micah was talking about, Cordes, Tantau, being in the Netherlands. So I mean, expand on that a little bit.
Michael took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, that was exactly what I wanted to say. Especially Cordes was one of the first who started non-spraying in the fields, and of course, for 25 years we've been looking for the most sustainable, the most healthy roses on earth from every side of the world, because it was impossible for us to keep a not healthy rose alive. And the reason why we say that plants, not only roses, are healthier because they are bioorganic is true. Because if they survive, they are healthy, they are hardy. If they are not, they don't survive. So it's as simple as that. So in our nursery, we could always guarantee our customers that they got a healthy rose, and that if it doesn't thrive, then they could come to us and get another one, because the ones that did not thrive were already dead in the field. And that's a big difference between our rose nursery and a rose nursery that uses chemical fertilizers and sprays to keep them growing, keep them growing, keep them growing. But a customer comes, he puts the rose in his garden, and the thing dies. He says, "What did I do wrong?" You didn't do anything wrong. The one who made the rose made the mistake. You can only sell roses that you're guaranteed that they will be good, and that's what happened, and that was our success.
Well, and I think, the thing we talk, that you kind of hear this organic gardening, and I find when I do talks and I do lectures, and I know for you all as well, particularly in the United States, particularly if I go to a general gardening group, a master gardening group or something like that, and I say, we grow roses, and you see them all, their faces get long, and they say, "Oh, I can't grow these." And then you start talking about organic gardening. I think there's an inspiration in that all of a sudden that begins to inspire people. And I think gardening is an inspirational thing. It's I find for myself. I mean, I talked about in the beginning. What was your first moment? And Michael, you're a David Austin person, and you probably would appreciate this. Was I got a couple roses initially from Jackson Perkins. They were Crystalline, Pristine, and Olympiad, which are three hybrid teas, and they were okay. I liked them. And then someone told me I was in Southern California about these David Austin roses. And what the hell's a David Austin rose? And the first ones I got, Michael, Graham Thomas and Gertrude Jekyll.
Yeah, grew
Yeah,
like monsters.
yeah. Well, the literature, Michael said they only got 6 feet tall. We all know how that turned out. But that was an inspiration moment for me. So, I mean, and I'd like to kind of like take this back to us a little bit. I mean, are there inspiring moments in gardening when you just said, okay, this became more? We all talked about, you all love gardening. It came from your families. That's the common thread that you all had. So, Teresa, was there a moment in the garden it was just that you just went, "Oh my gosh, this is," what is it as inspiring moments I think we've all shared?
Well, I want to talk about my inspiring moment that happened when I was given a gift of roses, because it really did change my life. When I was a teenager, I had a simple surgery and it kept me home for a little while. Now, we lived out in the country and people didn't stop by, but a friend from school stopped by and she brought me this huge bouquet of roses. I can still see it, I can still smell it. I was awestruck. And I said, "Where did you get these?" And she said, "My mother's garden." Now, I already told you that we were great gardeners. We were busy gardeners, but I had no idea up to that point that you could grow something like that in your garden. And even as a teenager, I said, someday I'm going to have a rose garden and I'm going to put those roses in vases and I'm going to give them to someone and make their day, hopefully, the way she made mine. But there's another addendum to that story that I want to share with you guys. And that is that she and I took different paths. We lived in different states. We didn't really keep up. And but a few years ago, we got back together, and I could tell that she had read my blog and she knew that I grew roses because she was super eager to tell me that she grew roses too. And I said, "Well, of course you do. You're the reason I grow roses." So I told her the story. She didn't remember it. This was just something that her family did. She and her mom had a rose garden and they gave roses away. She was as shocked that I remembered a story that was very common to her. She didn't even remember it, and I never forgot it. And I still haven't forgot it. And I think the moral of that story is we need to keep sharing either our knowledge or what we grow, because you don't know whose life you're changing.
It also, I think, illustrates that, just a life lesson that there's, what seems to that person something they do on an everyday basis for you was a life-changing event. And never underestimates a gesture that you might take to somebody or someone like that. So, Michael or Geertje, which one of you would like to pick up this thread about, just what was an inspiring moment in the garden or something that just went, "Oh my gosh." See, Geertje, I'm going to let you go ahead.
Yes, okay. Well, actually, it was the challenge when I started gardening. I didn't do it before. I saw my father do it, and I saw how much he liked it. And then I started gardening in this big garden around the farm. And the season after that, I thought, "Oh my gosh, I can do this. This works. See how this turns out." And after that, I could do more and more and more. But then, yeah, well, as you know, I had kids. We started the nursery, and it was I had a side job, and I had less time to do it. But because my garden had a good start, and it was a non-spray garden from the beginning. Um, it helped itself, and I was really astonished that this garden didn't grow over with all kinds of weeds or nothing, and I didn't have very much time to be in it, but it worked. It worked, and that was so good to see that I got more fanatic every year.
Yeah, there's a great book that I read early on in my gardening career called the Findhorn Garden Book about a garden called Findhorn that was created, and they worked in soil that was very at a climate that was not hospitable at all to gardens in the least. But they found the more gardening they put in, the more plants they put in, all of a sudden it became its own ecosystem.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to do, and it works.
Yeah, and that book was inspirational for me. So, Michael, as someone who has certainly had a lifelong, very well-respected career in horticulture and garden, not just roses, but gardening in general. I mean, I always say if I could define a person who's a plant head, it's Michael Marriott. You're a walking encyclopedia. I love going to gardens with you because, you're just rattling off names in Latin, and I'm going, I have no clue what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
what are some of the things from you? I mean, just from what you've done in your career.
Yes, I've been very lucky. I've the chance to travel the world, as you say, and live in various places. So I remember those irises I mentioned earlier on the beard. I still remember those today, and my mother giving to my teacher for some reason. I can't remember why. I lived in the South Pacific for 5 years and also in Swaziland. And there, the flora is just utterly, utterly different. And so to me, that was absolutely wonderful. And then getting to go to places like Mount Kinabalu up in the northeastern corner of Borneo, which is a center of diversity for plants, and seeing things like pitcher plants growing wild and orchids and things like it was just and also it's a center of diversity also for the genus Musa, which is the group of bananas. And then so I, I don't know. I just have this complete fascination with variation in plants, and I think I'm very I can spot plants and spot affinities in plants and differences. So I mean, it's just like some people will look at a car and they'll immediately identify it as a BMW so and so so. And to me, it's just a lump of metal on four wheels sort of thing. Whereas with me, I can look at the plant and I can easily sort of categorize it in my mind. And I always find it amazing. I'll see a plant maybe I haven't seen for 10 years, and just somehow this name pops into my head of what it is. So just traveling the world and seeing the plants in various places is just so fascinating. And just thinking about roses, Cleo, roses had a very bad history, haven't they? They were sort of grown so badly and bred so badly for so many years. I always remember my grandparents' garden. There's these things called roses that were in sort of an oval bed, sort of like half a dozen roses with no leaves on them and the odd flower stuck on top, and they were just absolutely hideous. And I was watching a television program, and David Austin was like, this is before I joined it, David Austin. Uh, he was being interviewed by Susan Williams Ellis, who started the Port Merion pottery, and they were walking around the greenhouses, and they showed this rose, which they identified as Wise Portia, which some of you might know. So, I mean, it's a variety from the 70s, I suppose, maybe early 80s, somewhere. And I thought, I just completely transformed my mind and thought about how wonderful roses were. So up to then, I just thought they were just a complete waste of space, really. And then I saw this wise portion. I suddenly realized that they could be beautiful. And it was only a few years later that I joined David Austin's. And then my eyes opened to the huge range of different roses that you can grow. And it's such a fascinating group. So, but all plants are fascinating. You know, I struggle sometimes with new varieties of various plants that are introduced for the sake of novelty. I hate novelty for the sake of novelty. I like beauty in my plants,
Yeah.
but novelty to me is no, waste of time. I'll just give you one example. It's one that I often quote. Snapdragons, antirrhinums. I want my snapdragons to look like snapdragons. I don't want them to look like something else. You know, so why bother to breed them to make them look like something else when snapdragons themselves are so beautiful?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, it's, I get asked a lot about, what are some of your favorite roses or what are the roses you always have in my garden? And I go back to a lot of the old garden roses that, I've had for years. And
Yeah,
those are, I love the new roses. They're beautiful, but there's something about those that have that charm. And as I mentioned earlier, for me, the David Austin roses was my charm and stuff. So this has been wonderful. We're coming up on probably I should begin to wrap this up a little bit. So we talked about gardening and gardening around the world and what got you into gardening and you all look back at yourselves as when you were young, was your parents' garden or a relative's garden that you sort of got this inspiration from. So now we're all a little more experienced gardeners. I will use that's the word I'm going to use. So we have this, experience amongst us all. But if you could now, knowing what you know now about gardening and knowing what you've learned throughout the years, if you could go back to yourself as a very beginning gardener and give yourself one bit of advice, Teresa, what would that bit of advice be?
It would absolutely be improve the soil before you plant a thing.
yeah,
We had a new build, so we had, very depleted garden of about an acre. And we did bring in a lot of topsoil, but of course, as my garden passion grew, we kept, going to other spaces. And going to where the soil had not been improved was just one problem after another. So improve the soil before you plant a thing. And then I think the other thing that I've struggled with and that I would tell my younger self, give roses enough space to reach their potential.
yes. Oh,
Michael, what would you do if you could go back to the young Michael Marriott in that garden in France? What advice would you give that young man?
oh gosh, in front of that, I was a bit young then to sort of have much idea. What I would say now is just don't interfere. You know, just work with nature. Don't try and battle against nature. You'll never win against nature. Work with nature. Don't try and controlling insects and things like that. And if something gets bad disease, as of some roses do, just I love this American phrase, shovel prune them. So yeah, in other words, dig them up and throw them out. It's not worth persevering. So yeah, just work with nature. And that thing that Teresa just said about giving plants their potential. Oh, such good words. Such good words.
Geertje, we're going to let you have the last word on this subject.
Well, I've been thinking about this. We're all in another part of the world, but even on a smaller scale, there's differences. Where I grew up in the northeast, there was a lot of sandy soil, and it was rather acid. And where I'm now, it's more clay soil, and it's very it's heavy clay and a lot of chalk in it. My
Oh,
pH.
alkaline.
Oh, okay, yes, that one. My pH is 7.8. So
Okay.
no azaleas, no rhododendrons, no Japanese maples. No, if you know what you're planting, it's going better. And in the beginning, I planted everything I liked, and I was asking myself, why doesn't it work? Because I was planting all kinds of stuff that doesn't belong on this soil. So if I could talk to myself 25 years ago, I would say start with good information on what do you plant where. And I see in the garden centers, even here, I see plants that you cannot put here. I cannot put lavender here. That's stupid to sell. That's even stupid to sell. So go to a good nursery, go to someone who knows what he's selling, and then you plant the right plant in the right place.
And I think that all three of the points that you all made, even though we're making them, Geertje from the Netherlands and Michael from England and Teresa from Indiana and myself from South Carolina, that even though we're out in this world of gardening, it's amazing how much we have in common in the way that we do things. Every bit of advice that you all just gave to your younger self can apply to anywhere in the world that you absolutely are at this point in time. So I want to thank you so much for being part of this inaugural podcast that I'm doing, and I plan to do more of them. I feel like we can keep going. But Teresa, who has much more experience in podcasting, said 45 minutes, Paul. So so I'm going to thank you much. So Geertje van der Groot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah. I did pretty good with that, though, didn't I?
Yes,
Yeah, and I didn't. Yeah, that's good. So Geertje, Michael Marriott, Teresa Byington, thank you very, very much for being part of the inaugural podcast of mine.